No one forgets the sound of a microphone feeding back. But for the 600 elite guests at the Cathedral of St. Jude, the real shock was what followed. When the groom's mother stepped up to the podium, she didn't offer a toast or a blessing. She offered a public execution. Looking down her nose at the bride in her off-the-rack dress, she declared her a gold-digging fraud, a peasant entirely unworthy of their family name. The groom simply stood there, staring at his expensive shoes. As cruel laughter echoed through the vaulted ceilings, the bride didn't cry. She just smiled. Because what the groom's arrogant family didn't realize was that the very marble they stood on, the banks that held their wealth, and the city skyline they worshipped, all belonged to her. Victoria Harrington, known to her friends simply as Tori, lived a life of meticulous deception. To the world, she was a mid-level freelance graphic designer who drove a battered 2014 Honda Civic, bought her groceries with coupons, and lived in a cramped, charmingly dilapidated walk-up in the arts district of the city. In reality, Tori was the sole heir to Harrington and Cross Holdings. Her late father, Silas Harrington, had been a ruthless but brilliant titan of industry who had quietly bought up commercial real estate, luxury hotel chains, and majority shares in 3 regional banks before his passing. When Silas died, Tori inherited a staggering empire worth billions. But Silas had also left her with a warning. Wealth attracts vultures, Tori. If you want to know who truly loves you, hide the gold. Tori took that advice to heart. When she met Derek Whitmore at a charity fundraiser, where she was volunteering at the coat check, and he was aggressively networking, she introduced herself simply as a struggling artist. Derek was handsome, charming, and a junior partner at his father's mid-sized corporate law firm, Whitmore and Associates. He swept her off her feet with expensive dinners and grand romantic gestures. For a year, Tori believed she had found a man who loved her for her spirit, not her portfolio. However, Derek's family was a different story. The Whitmores were new money, desperately pretending to be old aristocracy. Derek's father, William, was obsessed with golf club memberships and tailored suits, while his mother, Eleanor, was a terrifying force of social climbing snobbery. From the moment Derek brought Tori home to their sprawling suburban estate, Eleanor made her disdain palpable. A freelancer, artist, you say? Eleanor had sneered over a plate of duck confit during their first dinner. She looked at Tori's simple, unbranded blouse as if it were contaminated. How quaint. Tell me, Victoria, does that even provide a pension? Or are you relying on Derek's future to secure your own? Derek had nervously chuckled, offering a weak defense. Mum, Tori works very hard. She's got a great portfolio. I'm sure she does, darling, Eleanor replied, sipping her wine. But a portfolio doesn't pay the mortgage on a house in our zip code. As the wedding approached, the emotional abuse escalated. Eleanor hijacked the planning, insisting on booking the Grand Astor Hotel, the most exclusive and expensive venue in the city, to impress her country club friends. Tori, playing the part of the overwhelmed, broke bride, offered to contribute her modest savings. Eleanor had literally laughed in her face. The breaking point of the pre-wedding tension happened at the rehearsal dinner. Eleanor had invited Sylvia Carmichael, the heiress to a regional logistics company. Sylvia was blonde, dripping in diamonds, and the woman Eleanor had desperately wanted Derek to marry. During the toasts, Eleanor stood up, tapping her champagne glass. To my wonderful son, Derek, we always knew you were destined for greatness, and to Victoria, who has certainly caught a lucky break. It's not every day a girl from the arts district lands a Whitmore. In fact, Sylvia and I were just saying how astounded we are that you managed to pull this off. The room went dead silent. Tori looked at Derek, waiting for him to defend her, to tell his mother to sit down. Instead, Derek stared at his plate, his face flushed red, entirely unwilling to challenge his mother's checkbook. Tori gripped her napkin under the table. She had spent the last 2 years hiding her true self, testing Derek's character. She just didn't realize how spectacularly he was about to fail. The wedding day arrived with crisp, perfect weather. The Grand Astor Hotel's magnificent ballroom was draped in white orchids and imported silk. 600 guests, representing the absolute elite of the city's high society, filled the gilded chairs. Tori stood at the end of the aisle in a beautiful but incredibly simple dress she claimed to have bought at a sample sale. As the string quartet played, she walked toward Derek. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, but his eyes were darting nervously toward the front row, where his mother sat with a posture of pure, coiled venom. Beside Eleanor sat Sylvia Carmichael, wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like a bridal gown. Tori reached the altar. The officiant, an old friend of the Whitmore family, began the ceremony. Everything seemed normal until he reached the traditional, largely ceremonial question. If anyone knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever. Hold your peace. Eleanor Whitmore stood up. I have a reason, her voice rang out, sharp and amplified by the acoustics of the grand ballroom. A collective gasp rippled through the 600 guests. Tori's heart pounded, but she kept her face perfectly neutral. She looked at Derek. He wasn't surprised. He looked terrified, but he wasn't surprised. He knew. Eleanor stepped out of the pew and walked right up to the altar, completely ignoring the officiant. She turned to face the crowd. My family has built a legacy of excellence, integrity, and financial responsibility, Eleanor announced, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. We welcome those who add to our family's standing, but we absolutely will not be made fools of by a parasite. She turned to Tori, her eyes blazing with malice. Did you really think I wouldn't run a background check, Victoria? Did you honestly believe I would let my son marry a woman with $60,000 in student loan debt, no assets, and a credit score that borders on poverty? Whispers erupted across the ballroom. High society gossips covered their mouths, their eyes wide with scandalized delight. Mum, please, Derek whispered. But it was incredibly weak. It was the plea of a coward. No, Derek, Eleanor snapped. She snapped her fingers, and Chloe, Derek's sister, stood up, holding a thick manila folder. I have the financial reports right here. She is a liability. She has spent the last 2 years manipulating my son, hoping to sink her claws into the Whitmore estate to pay off her pathetic life. Eleanor looked at Tori, a triumphant smirk twisting her face. You are white trash, Victoria. You don't belong in this hotel. You don't belong in this dress. And you certainly don't belong in my family. The wedding is off. Tori didn't look at Eleanor. She looked at the man she had loved for 2 years, the man she was about to give everything to. Derek? Tori asked, her voice soft but perfectly steady. Are you going to let her do this? Are you going to let her speak to me like this? Derek wouldn't meet her eyes. He looked at his mother, then at Sylvia in the front row, and finally, agonizingly, at Tori. Tori, I'm sorry, Derek stammered, his voice trembling. My mum has a point. You lied to me about your debt. You hid your financial struggles. I'm a junior partner now. I'm in line for managing director next year. I can't have a wife who drags down my credit and my reputation. My parents are cutting me off if I go through with this. I'm sorry. The betrayal was absolute. It was a cold, physical blow to Tori's chest. He wasn't just abandoning her. He had conspired with his mother to humiliate her in front of the entire city. They wanted to destroy her so Derek could save face and pivot to Sylvia without looking like the bad guy. To them, she was a disposable prop in their social theatre. Laughter trickled from the front rows. Sylvia was openly giggling behind her hand. William Whitmore looked at his watch, clearly bored with the spectacle and ready for lunch. "Get your things and leave through the service elevator, Victoria," Eleanor commanded, gesturing toward the back of the room. "I'm sure you can find the kitchen. It's where the staff exits." For 10 agonizing seconds, there was silence at the altar. The crowd waited for the poor, humiliated bride to burst into tears and run away in shame. They waited for the breakdown. It never came. Tori closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let out a long, slow sigh. When she opened her eyes, the modest, timid freelance artist was gone. The posture of Silas Harrington's daughter, a woman trained to dismantle corporate raiders before breakfast, took over. She stood up perfectly straight, her shoulders pulled back, radiating a sudden, freezing authority that made Eleanor physically take a step back. "A background check," Tori said. Her voice was no longer soft. It projected across the room, crystal clear and lethally calm. "You hired a private investigator to look into Victoria Harrington, the graphic designer, and you found exactly what I paid my accountants to let you find." Eleanor scoffed, though her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you rambling about? Have you lost your mind from the shock?" Tori ignored her. She reached into the bodice of her simple wedding gown, pulled out a sleek black smartphone, and dialed a single number. She put it on speaker and held it up to the officiant's microphone. The phone rang once. "Miss Harrington," a deep, crisp voice answered over the sound system. It was Benjamin Hayes, the most feared corporate attorney on the eastern seaboard. "Benjamin," Tori said, her eyes locked dead onto Derek's pale face. "Execute Order 66 on the Whitmore accounts, and bring Mr. DuPont to the ballroom immediately." "Right away, ma'am. I am walking through the lobby now." Tori hung up the phone. She handed the device to the stunned officiant and turned to face the Whitmore family. "What is the meaning of this?" William Whitmore boomed, standing up from his seat. "Who is Benjamin? Are you threatening us, you little brat?" "I'm not threatening you, William," Tori said smoothly. "I'm auditing you." Before William could respond, the massive oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A heavy silence fell over the crowd as 2 men walked briskly down the center aisle. One was Benjamin Hayes, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. The other was Henri Dupont, the legendary, notoriously strict general manager of the Grand Astor Hotel. Eleanor recognized Mr. Dupont immediately. She had spent 3 months kissing his ring to secure this ballroom. "Mr. Dupont!" Eleanor cried out, pointing at Tori. "Thank goodness! Please have hotel security remove this woman. She is trespassing on my private event." Mr. Dupont didn't even look at Eleanor. He walked straight past her, stopped in front of Tori, and gave a deep, formal bow. "Ms. Harrington," Mr. Dupont said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "I apologize for the disturbance. Your attorney has briefed me. What are your instructions?" Eleanor froze. Derek's jaw dropped. The murmurs in the crowd stopped entirely. "Mr. Dupont," Tori said, her voice dripping with ice. "Who owns the Grand Astor Hotel?" Mr. Dupont turned to face the crowd, clasping his hands behind his back. "The Grand Astor is a subsidiary property wholly owned by Harrington and Cross Holdings, of which you, Ms. Harrington, are the chairman, CEO, and 92% majority shareholder." The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the air conditioning humming. Eleanor's face drained of all color, turning the shade of spoiled milk. Derek stumbled backward, catching himself on the altar rail. That's impossible," Eleanor stammered, her voice cracking. She has 60,000 in debt. The files. The files, Benjamin Hayes said, stepping forward and opening his briefcase, were a legally constructed financial dummy profile created to protect Ms. Harrington's anonymity. A profile you illegally accessed, Mrs. Whitmore, which we will be addressing in a separate civil suit. Tori took a step toward Derek. The boy she thought she loved looked like he was going to vomit. You wanted to protect your family's legacy, Derek? Tori asked softly, the heartbreak finally showing, just for a second, before being buried under pure steel. Your family's firm, Whitmore and Associates, operates on a $10 million revolving credit line, a credit line held by Silverstone Capital. William Whitmore gasped, clutching his chest. Yes, William, Tori said, locking eyes with the patriarch. I own Silverstone Capital too, and as of 60 seconds ago, when I made that phone call, your firm's credit line was permanently revoked due to moral turpitude and breach of trust. You have 30 days to pay back the $10 million, or I will personally liquidate your firm, your house, and the golf clubs you love so much. Tori turned back to Mr. DuPont. Mr. DuPont, this event is cancelled. The Whitmores are no longer guests of my hotel. Evict them. Mr. DuPont, a man whose entire career was built on discretion and invisible service, didn't hesitate. He snapped his fingers, a sharp sound that echoed like a gunshot in the dead-silent ballroom. Instantly, 6 burly men in tailored black suits, the Grand Astor's elite private security detail, stepped out from the alcoves where they had been stationed. Escort the Whitmore family off the premises, Mr. DuPont instructed, his tone conversational but absolute. They are trespassing. If they resist, call the municipal police and have them charged. Pandemonium broke out, but it wasn't the kind of loud, chaotic screaming you see in movies. It was the frantic, hushed panic of high society, realizing they were standing too close to a sinking ship. The 600 guests, who just moments ago had been sneering at the poor bride, were suddenly scrambling to put distance between themselves and Eleanor Whitmore. "You can't do this!" Eleanor shrieked, the veneer of aristocratic grace completely shattering. She clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged disbelief. "William, do something. Call the mayor. Tell them who we are." William Whitmore, however, was incapable of doing anything. The patriarch of the family had collapsed back into his front row pew, his face flushed a dangerous, mottled purple. He was a corporate lawyer. He knew exactly what it meant when a revolving credit line was called in due to a breach of trust clause. It meant immediate, unmitigated bankruptcy. He was hyperventilating, loosening his silk tie with trembling fingers. Derek, realizing the utter catastrophe he had just enabled, rushed toward Tori. The cowardly boy who had refused to look at her 5 minutes earlier was now desperate. "Tori, wait, please," Derek pleaded, reaching out to grab her arm. Before his fingers could even brush the silk of her dress, Benjamin Hayes stepped smoothly between them, his hand resting firmly on Derek's chest. "Do not touch my client, Mr. Whitmore," Benjamin warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Tori, baby, listen to me," Derek begged, peering over the lawyer's shoulder. Tears were actually welling in his eyes. "This is a misunderstanding. My mother, she went crazy. I didn't know she was going to do this. We can fix this. I love you. I was just trying to protect our future." Tori looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The love she had harbored for him had evaporated the second he agreed with his mother's cruel assessment of her worth. "You didn't want to protect our future, Derek," Tori said, her voice carrying easily across the room. "You wanted to protect your inheritance. You wanted to make sure your country club dues were paid. You threw me to the wolves because you thought I had nothing to offer you. Well, you were right about one thing. I have absolutely nothing to offer you now. 2 security guards flanked Eleanor, gently but firmly grasping her elbows. "Take your hands off me," she hissed, trying to wrench herself free. She looked desperately toward the front row. "Sylvia, tell your father to do something. Harrison is on the board of the Commerce Committee." Sylvia Carmichael, who had been openly laughing just minutes prior, stood up so fast she nearly knocked her chair over. She looked at Tori, then at Eleanor, doing rapid, terrifying mental math. Her family's logistics company, Carmichael Freight, relied heavily on the shipping contracts controlled by Harrington and Cross Holdings. To side with the Whitmores now would mean corporate suicide. "I don't know what you're talking about, Eleanor," Sylvia said loudly, grabbing her designer clutch. She completely avoided Derek's pleading gaze. "I was only here out of polite obligation." "Excuse me." Sylvia practically sprinted up the center aisle, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble. "Sylvia!" Eleanor wailed, the ultimate betrayal from her hand-picked, wealthy daughter-in-law slicing through her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tori announced to the remaining guests, who were watching the spectacle with a mix of terror and morbid fascination. "The wedding is cancelled. However, the reception hall has been fully paid for by me. Please, transition to the dining room. Enjoy the caviar and the champagne. I insist." With a final dismissive glance at the weeping Derek and the hyperventilating William, Tori turned on her heel. Flanked by Benjamin Hayes and Mr. DuPont, she walked out of the ballroom, her head held high. Behind her, the security guards began forcibly marching the screaming Eleanor and the sobbing Derek toward the service elevators. They were taking out the trash. By 9 a.m. on Monday, the shock waves of the botched wedding had leveled the Whitmores' entire reality. Tori sat at the head of the massive mahogany conference table in the penthouse suite of Harrington Tower, a glass and steel monolith that dominated the city's skyline. She was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, a far cry from the oversized sweaters and worn jeans she had worn during her struggling artist charade. "Give me the casualty report, Benjamin," Tori said, sipping her black coffee. Benjamin Hayes, looking perfectly rested despite working through the weekend, flipped open a tablet. "It's a bloodbath, Miss Harrington," Benjamin stated plainly. "As per your instructions, Silverstone Capital officially issued the demand notice to Whitmore and Associates at 8:01 a.m. They have exactly 30 days to repay the $10 million in full. Given their current liquidity, or lack thereof, they will default by Friday." "And William's personal assets?" Tori asked, her tone clinical. "Heavily leveraged," Benjamin replied, a hint of a grim smile on his face. "Their sprawling estate in Oakbrook, second mortgage, the country club memberships, delinquent. They've been living entirely on credit, banking on Derek's promotion and the firm's perceived stability to keep the house of cards standing. When word got out over the weekend about what happened at the Astor, the market reacted." Tori nodded. High society was a small, vicious ecosystem. By Sunday evening, everyone who mattered knew that the Whitmores had deeply, fatally insulted the sole heir to the Harrington empire. No one wanted to be caught in the blast radius. "What about Eleanor?" "Blacklisted," Benjamin confirmed. The board of the Hawthorne Country Club held an emergency meeting on Sunday. They revoked her membership, citing conduct unbecoming. Furthermore, the charity gala she was supposed to chair next month? The organizers called her this morning to inform her that her services are no longer required. They cannot risk Harrington Holdings pulling our philanthropic funding. Tori felt a brief, dark flutter of satisfaction. Eleanor had worshipped social status above all else, wielding it like a club against those she deemed inferior. To strip that away from her was the ultimate justice. And Derek? Tori asked softly. Before Benjamin could answer, the sleek intercom on the conference table buzzed. "Ms. Harrington," her executive assistant, Claire, said through the speaker. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is a Derek Whitmore in the main lobby." Security stopped him at the turnstiles. He's causing a bit of a scene, ma'am. He's demanding to see you, saying he's your fiancé." Tori stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the tiny yellow cabs crawling along the avenue 50 stories below. "Put the lobby camera on the screen," Tori commanded. The large monitor at the end of the boardroom flickered to life. There was Derek. The impeccably groomed, arrogant junior partner from Saturday was gone. He looked disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his hair unkempt. He was arguing frantically with two massive security guards, waving a bouquet of pathetic-looking corner store roses. "You don't understand. She loves me. I just need 5 minutes to explain." Derek's voice filtered through the audio feed, cracking with desperation. He was looking around the sprawling, billion-dollar lobby of Harrington Tower, the Italian marble, the priceless modern art, the endless stream of high-powered executives, and the true, crushing reality of what he had thrown away was finally sinking in. He hadn't just lost a woman. He had lost an empire. "Shall I have him removed by the police?" Benjamin asked, adjusting his glasses. "No," Tori said, turning away from the screen. "That's too easy. He needs to understand that the door isn't just closed, it's bricked over." She walked over to Benjamin and tapped his tablet. "Draft a letter, an itemized invoice." Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "For what, exactly?" "For my time, Benjamin. For the 2 years I spent pretending to tolerate his insufferable mother. But more legally speaking, bill him for the damages to the Grand Astor Hotel, the emotional distress caused by his mother's public ambush, the breach of contract regarding the wedding venue. I want a bill so staggeringly petty and legally binding that he chokes on it." "And the delivery method?" "Print it out," Tori said coldly. "Go down to the lobby, hand it to him, and tell him that if he ever contacts me, approaches this building, or speaks my name again, I won't just bankrupt his father's firm. I will buy the firm, fire his father, and make Derek the janitor." Benjamin nodded, an unmistakable look of professional admiration in his eyes. "Right away, Miss Harrington." As Benjamin left the penthouse to deliver the final blow, Tori sat back down at the head of the table. The modest fiancée was dead. The Titan had taken her seat. The 30-day countdown initiated by Benjamin Hayes was not merely a legal grace period. It was a slow, agonizing psychological execution designed to strip the Whitmore family of everything they held dear. For the first week, William Whitmore operated under the delusion that he could fix it. He was, after all, a senior partner with 30 years of experience in corporate law. He believed he could navigate his way out of the crisis through sheer charisma and calling in old favors. But he fundamentally misunderstood the sheer, terrifying gravity of the Harrington name. Victoria Harrington hadn't just called in alone, she had declared radioactive war. By day 12, Whitmore and Associates had transformed from a bustling, prestigious downtown law firm into a ghost ship. The bleeding began quietly. First, the smaller corporate clients requested their files be transferred, citing vague conflicts of interest. Then, the major accounts followed. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Thomas Bradford, a senior partner who had shared an office wall with William for 15 years, walked into William's sprawling corner suite. Thomas didn't sit down. He simply placed a single sheet of heavy, watermarked paper onto William's mahogany desk. "What is this, Thomas?" William asked, looking up from a pile of rapidly deteriorating financial projections. His face was grey, the bags under his eyes prominent and dark. "My formal resignation, William," Thomas said flatly. "And a notice of transition. The Peterson Group and Sterling Logistics are coming with me. We're moving to a boutique firm on the west side." William stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You can't do that! Thomas, we built this firm together. We just hit a rough patch. Silverstone Capital made an administrative error calling in that line of credit. I have injunctions filed. I'll have the $10 million reinstated by Friday." Thomas looked at him with a mixture of pity and utter disgust. "Don't insult my intelligence, William. The entire Eastern Seaboard knows what happened at the Grand Astor. You didn't just cross a billionaire. Your wife publicly humiliated the sole heir to Harrington and Cross Holdings. Silverstone didn't make an error. They are executing a targeted demolition. This firm is toxic. If I stay here another week, my own reputation goes down with your sinking ship." "We are partners," William bellowed, slamming his fist on the desk. "We were partners," Thomas corrected, turning toward the door. "Before you let Eleanor's pathetic social climbing dictate your family's actions. Good luck with the auditors, William. You're going to need it." When the door clicked shut, the silence in the office was deafening. Outside William's glass walls, the bullpen was a scene of panicked evacuation. Paralegals were packing cardboard boxes. Associates were huddled in whispered conversations, scrolling through job boards on their monitors. The $10 million credit line from Silverstone Capital had been the lifeblood of their operations. It paid the exorbitant lease on the 32nd floor. It covered the partner draws. It floated their payroll. Without it, the firm was actively suffocating, and everyone knew it. Back at the sprawling Whitmore estate in the exclusive suburb of Oak Brook, the atmosphere was even more toxic. The grand facade of the house remained, but the rot inside was spreading rapidly. Eleanor Whitmore, stripped of her country club membership and blacklisted from every charity gala in the city, had descended into a state of manic denial. She refused to leave the house, terrified of running into the women she used to dominate, knowing they were now laughing at her behind their manicured hands. Instead, she took to day-drinking expensive, imported Sauvignon Blanc in her silk bathrobe. The landscaping company had quit when their invoice went unpaid. The pristine Olympic-sized swimming pool in the backyard was beginning to turn a cloudy, neglected shade of green. Their longtime housekeeper, Rosa, had tearfully resigned after her weekly check bounced. Derek haunted the sprawling hallways like an empty shell. The impeccably groomed, arrogant junior partner had vanished. He hadn't shaved in days. He spent hours sitting in his custom walk-in closet, staring at the rows of tailored suits and Italian leather shoes he could no longer afford to maintain. He tried to call his friends, the wealthy trust fund babies he used to play squash with, but his calls went straight to voicemail. He had even swallowed his pride and driven to Sylvia Carmichael's penthouse, only to be told by the doorman that Miss Carmichael had specifically barred him from the building. One evening, the simmering tension in the house finally boiled over. Derek walked into the sunroom to find Eleanor staring at her iPad, a half-empty wine glass dangling from her fingers. "Look at this," Eleanor slurred, tapping the screen aggressively. "The Botanical Society Gala. They have Cynthia Sterling chairing the committee." "Cynthia, the woman doesn't know a hydrangea from a weed. It's an absolute travesty." "I should be there." Derek stared at his mother, a cold, sickening realization washing over him. "Mum, we are about to lose the house. Dad's firm is defaulting in 4 days. And you are worried about the Botanical Gala?" Eleanor whipped her head around, her eyes flashing with indignant fury. "Do not speak to me in that tone, Derek. This is not our fault. It is that vindictive, psychotic little snake you brought into my home. Victoria is using her monopolistic power to bully us. We are victims." Victims? Derek let out a harsh, broken laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. You hired a private investigator to dig through her trash. You stood up at the altar and called her white trash in front of 600 people. You told her to leave through the kitchen. I was protecting you, Eleanor screamed, throwing her wine glass. It shattered against the stone fireplace, sending shards of crystal and pale liquid everywhere. I was protecting our family's standards. What standards? Derek yelled back, stepping closer, the anger finally breaking through his depression. We are broke, Mom. We've always been broke. We've been living on Dad's credit and hoping nobody noticed. Tori was the only real thing in my life, and I let you destroy it because I was too much of a coward to tell you to shut up. Derek turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Eleanor standing alone amidst the shattered glass, her chest heaving, entirely unwilling to accept her reflection in the mirror he had just held up. But William Whitmore was a cornered animal, and cornered animals, no matter how wounded, have a tendency to bite. On day 25, with bankruptcy not just looming but actively breaking down the front door, William hatched a desperate, final plan. If he couldn't win in a courtroom against the ruthless precision of Benjamin Hayes, he would win in the court of public opinion. He would burn Victoria Harrington to the ground with him. William reached out to Titus Penhaligon. Titus was a senior investigative journalist for the Daily Sentinel, a massive publication notorious for its aggressive, mud-slinging takedowns of high-profile billionaires and politicians. Titus was a shark who smelled blood in the water from a mile away. William invited Titus to the Oakbrook estate for an exclusive, off-the-record preliminary meeting. They sat in William's dimly lit, oak-panelled study. The air smelled of stale scotch and desperation. "She is a predator, Titus," William proclaimed, leaning forward in his leather armchair. He had rehearsed this performance perfectly, trying to project the image of a weary, besieged patriarch fighting against impossible odds. Victoria Harrington infiltrated my family under a false identity. She deceived my son, broke his heart, and when we discovered her deception, she used her immense corporate power to illegally bankrupt a small, family-run law firm out of pure, vindictive spite. It's antitrust behavior. It's corporate bullying of the highest order. Titus Penhaligon sat across from him, his pen poised over a leather-bound notepad. He didn't look sympathetic. He looked hungry. "And you have proof of this malicious intent, Mr. Whitmore?" Spite is hard to prove in print. "I have the digital timeline," William insisted, pulling a sleek, black USB drive from his pocket and sliding it across the coffee table. "This drive contains the firm's internal server logs, alongside the exact timestamp of the wedding incident. She called in a $10 million loan literally minutes after a minor family disagreement at the altar. It was premeditated financial assassination. Publish this, Titus. Expose her. The regulatory commissions will be forced to investigate Harrington and Cross Holdings." Titus picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers. He looked at William, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I need to ask you directly, William. Is your firm's financial history entirely clean? If my analysts crack this drive and look into your ledgers, will they find anything else? Because if I fire a shot at the Harrington empire, I cannot miss." William didn't even blink. He lied with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 30 years defending corporate criminals. "We are impeccable. This is a pure, unadulterated vendetta." Titus smiled, slipping the drive into his breast pocket. "Consider it done, William. The story goes live on Sunday morning. Front page, digital, and print." Sunday morning arrived with a torrential downpour, the rain lashing against the massive windows of the Oakbrook estate. Despite the gloom outside, the atmosphere inside the kitchen was charged with a manic, frantic energy. Eleanor had actually showered and dressed in a tailored cashmere sweater. She was standing by the espresso machine, a glimmer of genuine hope in her eyes for the first time in a month. She firmly believed this article would turn the tide, forcing high society to rally behind them against the tyrannical Victoria Harrington. Derek sat slumped at the kitchen island, staring blankly at his cold coffee. He didn't share his parents' optimism. He knew Tori. He had watched her play the role of a timid artist flawlessly for 2 years. He knew she was 10 steps ahead of them. She didn't leave loose ends. William sat at the head of the island, his iPad propped up on a silver stand. He kept glancing at his Rolex. It was 7:58 a.m. "Titus assured me it would be the headline," William said, his foot tapping nervously against the stool. "Once the public sees what she's done, the SEC will be swarming Harrington Tower by Monday." 8 a.m. William hit refresh on the Daily Sentinel's home page. The screen went white for a fraction of a second, and then the new front page loaded. The color instantly and violently drained from William's face. He stopped breathing. The iPad slipped from his trembling hands, clattering loudly onto the marble countertop. Eleanor rushed over, snatching it up. The headline didn't read, "Billionaire Heiress Destroys Innocent Family." The headline read, in massive, bold, damning letters, "Whitmore and Associates exposed how a prominent corporate law firm embezzled $15 million to fund a high society lifestyle." The article was a masterpiece of devastating forensic journalism. It didn't mention Victoria Harrington, the botched wedding, or the romantic drama at all. Instead, it detailed exactly why the $10 million credit line from Silverstone Capital had been revoked. It laid out, with irrefutable, heavily redacted documentation straight from the firm's own servers, how William Whitmore had been quietly siphoning money from his largest clients' escrow accounts for the past 5 years. He had stolen millions to pay for Eleanor's extravagant country club dues, Derek's luxury sports cars, the second mortgage on the Oakbrook estate, and a staggering amount of hidden, unsecured personal debt. He had been using the Silverstone credit line to desperately plug the holes, shuffling money between accounts just before the quarterly auditors noticed. "William," Eleanor whispered, the iPad shaking in her hands. Her voice was thin, completely stripped of its usual arrogance. "What is this? Is this true? Did you take their money?" Before William could formulate a lie, before he could even draw a breath to speak, his cell phone rang on the counter. The caller ID flashed. Titus Penhaligon. William reached out with a hand that was trembling so violently he could barely swipe the screen to answer. He put it on speaker. "Titus," William choked out, his voice a hoarse rasp. "What the hell did you do? You were supposed to expose her. You promised." "I'm an investigative journalist, William." Titus's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding entirely too cheerful and cold. "I follow the facts, and the facts on that USB drive you so helpfully handed over gave my tech team the backdoor access they needed to dig deep into your firm's internal ledgers. You handed me the murder weapon with your fingerprints all over it. You ruined me!" William screamed, tears of absolute panic finally spilling over his cheeks. "Actually, you ruined yourself, William," Titus replied smoothly. "But more importantly, you really, really should check who owns the parent companies of the people you pitch to." "What?" William breathed. MediaCorp Global finalized its acquisition of the Daily Sentinel 3 weeks ago, Titus said, the smugness practically radiating through the phone. "And MediaCorp Global is a direct subsidiary of Harrington and Cross Holdings. Ms. Harrington sends her regards. Have a lovely Sunday." The line went dead. Derek, his face ashen, looked at his father. The sheer magnitude of Tori's trap was breathtaking. She hadn't just anticipated William's move to the press, she had owned the very chessboard he was trying to play on. She had let him walk right into the trap, handing over the hard evidence of his own federal crimes directly to a publication she controlled. Outside the rain-streaked windows, a new sound cut through the storm. It started as a faint wail in the distance, quickly growing louder and more urgent as it echoed through the quiet, affluent streets of Oakbrook. Sirens. Multiple sirens. Derek walked slowly to the front window. Through the heavy rain, he saw a convoy of dark, unmarked SUVs and 3 municipal police cruisers turning onto their long, manicured driveway. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively, painting the walls of the grand foyer in frantic, chaotic colors. The FBI handed a perfectly packaged, publicly published confession of multi-million-dollar wire fraud and embezzlement had arrived to collect William Whitmore. The 30-day countdown was over. The execution was complete. 6 months later. The winter air was sharp and biting as Victoria Harrington stepped out of the plush, heated interior of her chauffeured Maybach. She pulled the collar of her tailored, charcoal grey cashmere coat tighter against the chill, her breath pluming in the crisp morning air. She stood at the edge of the sprawling property that used to be the Hawthorne Country Club, the exclusive, heavily guarded epicenter of the city's old money and generational wealth. Or at least, it used to be. The massive wrought-iron gates, which for a century had proudly displayed the club's aristocratic crest to keep the working class out, had been completely torn down. In their place stood a sleek, modern, welcoming archway made of reclaimed wood and brushed steel. A team of workmen in heavy winter jackets was currently hoisting a newly carved stone plaque over the entrance, securing it into the masonry. Tori watched in silence as the heavy canvas tarp was pulled away. The plaque read, in bold, clean lettering, "The Silas Harrington Center for the Arts. Public access. Free admission." "It looks spectacular, Miss Harrington," Benjamin Hayes said, stepping up beside her on the freshly poured concrete sidewalk. The ruthless corporate attorney adjusted his silk scarf, looking with mild, satisfied amusement at the heavily renovated grounds. The pristine, notoriously difficult 18-hole golf course, a stretch of land that used to require a $100,000 initiation fee just to walk on, had been completely excavated. Half of it was now a sprawling public sculpture garden, featuring installations by the very local artists Tori used to genuinely befriend. The other half was actively being converted into a massive outdoor amphitheater designed to host local musicians, theater troupes, and community symphony orchestras. The exact limestone patio where Eleanor Whitmore used to sip mimosas and ruthlessly judge the lineage of her peers was now a glass-enclosed community ceramics studio. "It does," Tori agreed, a genuine, warm smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The heavy armor she had worn since the disastrous wedding day finally seemed to lighten. Silas would have loved this. He always hated golf. He said it was a good walk, ruined by arrogant men in terrible pants. Benjamin chuckled softly, opening the sleek leather dossier he had tucked under his arm. "The final official paperwork went through this morning at the county clerk's office. The foreclosure on the Whitmore estate in Oakbrook is 100% complete." Tori didn't take her eyes off the new art center. "Give me the final casualty report, Benjamin. Close the ledger." "Gladly," Benjamin said, his tone shifting back to the crisp, clinical delivery of a man who dealt in absolute victories. "The bank auctioned the Oakbrook property to a commercial developer last week. They've already filed the permits to tear down that monstrous mansion. They plan to build a complex of affordable, multi-family housing duplexes on the lot. A fitting end for a monument to vanity. "And William?" Tory asked. "William Whitmore pleaded guilty to 3 counts of federal wire fraud and embezzlement," Benjamin stated, flipping a page. He tried to fight it for the first 2 months, hoping he could call in some political favors. But when the FBI presented him with the server logs Titus Penhaligon provided us, his defense attorney forced him to take a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. He was transferred to a medium-security federal penitentiary in upstate New York yesterday morning. He's serving 7 years. Without his country club privileges, I imagine the adjustment will be severe. Tory nodded slowly. "What about Eleanor?" A faint smirk crossed Benjamin's face. "Eleanor is currently residing in a 400-square-foot, 1-bedroom apartment in the industrial district, right next to the elevated train tracks. The court seized all her jewelry, her designer wardrobe, and her imported cars to pay restitution to the clients William stole from. She is currently employed as a front desk receptionist at a mid-level accounting firm." Benjamin paused, letting the poetic justice settle in the cold air. "She takes the public bus to work, Miss Harrington, and she spends 8 hours a day filing paperwork for wage earners who make a fraction of what she used to casually drop on a pair of summer sandals. The irony is practically a masterpiece. And Derek?" Tory's voice was quiet, stripped of the blazing anger that had fueled her takeover. Now, there was only clinical curiosity. "Derek is currently employed at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Harrington Tower," Benjamin replied. "He's a barista, ma'am. He still drops off his resume at corporate law firms on his lunch breaks, but given the massive, highly publicized federal scandal attached to his family name, and the fact that his father stole from his own clients, he is a walking liability. No reputable firm in the state will touch him." Tory looked out over the former country club, thinking back to the girl she was 2 years ago. She thought of the woman who had happily squeezed into an old, battered Honda Civic, carefully clipping grocery coupons at her kitchen table, desperately hoping she had found a man who loved her for the digital art she created and the warmth in her heart. She had built the perfect disguise, but the disguise had done exactly what her father warned her it would do. It revealed the absolute truth. She had been naive to believe love could exist in a vacuum, completely separated from reality. But she wasn't naive anymore. The fire of her vengeance had burned itself out over the last 6 months, leaving behind a cold, polished, unshakable core of pure titanium. "Ms. Harrington," a familiar, hesitant voice called out over the dull roar of the morning traffic. Tory turned. Standing near the edge of the newly paved sidewalk, clutching a flimsy cardboard tray carrying 4-to-go coffees, was Derek Whitmore. He was practically unrecognizable from the man who had stood at the altar of the Grand Astor Hotel 6 months ago. The impeccably groomed hair was overgrown and messy. The arrogant, self-assured posture of a junior partner had completely collapsed, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man beaten down by the world. He looked exhausted, the skin around his eyes bruised with dark circles. He was wearing a dark green barista apron over a faded, cheap t-shirt and scuffed canvas sneakers. He had clearly recognized the silhouette of her customized Maybach and walked over from his shift. Benjamin immediately stepped forward, his posture rigid, his hand reaching into his coat for his phone to call security. But Tory held up a single, gloved hand, stopping her lawyer in his tracks. Derek didn't try to approach her. He knew better now. He stood 10 feet away, a safe, respectful distance, looking up at the newly installed sign above the gates of the club his mother used to rule like a petty tyrant. He looked at Tory, wrapped in unimaginable wealth and unassailable power, surrounded by security details and elite lawyers. "Tory," Derek said. His voice cracked. It wasn't arrogant, and it wasn't defensive. It was hollowed out, carrying the immense, crushing weight of utter defeat. I saw the sign. I heard what you were building here. It's beautiful. What you're doing for the city. Tori met his gaze squarely. She felt no flutter in her chest, no residual spark of the love she had once harbored for him. He was just a ghost, haunting the edges of her empire. It's a space for people who create things, Derek, Tori said evenly, her voice carrying easily through the cold air. For people who build rather than tear down. For people who have actual value, regardless of their bank account. Derek swallowed hard, looking down at his worn sneakers. The cardboard tray trembled slightly in his hands. I know I can't apologize. I know what my family did, what I did, was unforgivable. I know it's too late. I wanted you to know that I finally understand. When the FBI took my dad, when Sylvia Carmichael wouldn't even let me into her building, the whole illusion shattered. I understand what I threw away at that altar, and it wasn't the billions of dollars. He looked up, tears pooling in his bloodshot eyes, spilling over onto his cheeks, freezing in the winter wind. I threw you away, Tori. I threw away the only person who actually cared about me when I had nothing to offer. And I have to live with that ghost for the rest of my life. Tori looked at him for a long, silent moment. She didn't offer him a reassuring smile, nor did she offer him a cruel insult to twist the knife. She offered him the one thing that truly separated her from the superficial, vindictive nature of the Whitmore family. Absolute closure. You made a choice at that altar, Derek, Tori said, her voice soft but entirely unyielding. You looked at me, and you chose the illusion of status over the reality of loyalty. You chose a country club over a partner. You are exactly where your choice has led you. I hope, for your own sake, you learn the difference between price and value before you run out of time. She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned her back to him, signaling to her driver with a brief nod. Benjamin Hayes seamlessly opened the heavy armored door of the Maybach. As Tori slid into the plush leather interior, returning to the empire she was born to rule, she didn't look back through the tinted windows. The powerful engine purred to life, and the heavy black car glided away down the avenue, merging seamlessly into the city traffic. She left Derek Whitmore standing completely alone on the freezing sidewalk, holding a tray of cheap coffee, staring blankly at the gates of his ruined legacy, forever locked outside the life he was too much of a coward to keep. The story of Victoria Harrington and the Whitmore family serves as a razor-sharp modern parable about the dangers of vanity, greed, and superficial judgment. When Eleanor and Derek Whitmore looked at Tori, they saw only a reflection of their own prejudices, a balance sheet they deemed unworthy. Their fatal flaw was believing that a person's value is defined by their perceived status rather than their character. In their relentless pursuit of preserving a hollow legacy, they entirely dismantled it themselves. Tori's journey, meanwhile, transforms from a quiet test of love into a masterclass in calculated absolute justice. She weaponized their arrogance against them, proving that true power doesn't need to scream its presence from a country club podium. True power waits, watches, and when pushed too far, completely rewrites the rules of the game. The Whitmores wanted to protect their assets. Instead, they became the ultimate liability.